Hi everybody, it's Sid from Cool Movie Gram, your source for everything about cool movies. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know your thoughts and check out my other content. Right, well, it's Christmas Eve 2023. So of course, last night I took part in a Christmas quiz with Hong Kong. And Beyond, which is the channel, and including Hus from A Touch of Film, Johnny from the Fanatical Dragon channel, and also Tristan from Martial Arts Film Freak. That was a great, fun evening, and we got to kind of like have a bit of a laugh. And I would definitely say check it out on Fanatical Dragon and also the Hong Kong and Beyond channel, HKB. Thanks to Leon and Shaz. And today, well, it's being that it's Christmas Eve, we're going to be reviewing an action movie, which was a Christmas action movie, which came out. I think it came out in the UK on demand on Friday, which was Silent Night, which is a 2023 film starring Joel Kinnaman. And it's directed by John Woo, which was his first Hollywood movie in 20 years since 2003's Paycheck. Since then, he had actually worked in China on his historical epic Red Cliff. He had his box office bomb, The Crossing, and also the not so successful Manhunt. This was kind of like came as a actual surprise. The plot of the film is about a father and a loving husband. His son is killed whilst two rival gangsters are actually engaged in a crossfire, moving vehicles during the drive-by. His son is injured and killed on the scene, and the father himself is left kind of like without a voice box because the bad guy just ends up shooting him there just to kind of to kill him, but he survives. The father turns to alcohol and depression. Eventually starts kind of like building himself towards revenge. This causes a strain on his marriage, so his wife ends up leaving him, and this guy just kind of like literally kind of builds his body and his mentality up, learns how to kind of like use weapons, and also be able to like just kind of like gather information on the gang and the people responsible for his son's death. And he goes on like kind of like a one man kind of like rampage against the criminals, just to kind of like get justice for what he lost. And bloody action ensues. Okay, well, yeah, this film was kind of released on Sky Cinema, so it didn't really release as a in theaters as it did in America and a few other markets. But what was really kind of interesting is that this film itself has no dialogue. There is no kind of like actual kind of like moments of where they kind of like the characters are kind of interacting with like kind of like saying what things were, having conversations and whatnot. But the fact is that this was actually a really kind of like interesting point, which was kind of like used to its maximum effect, because I was thinking that when I read some of the reviews of this film, I thought I'm not going to enjoy this film because of this whole kind of like lack of dialogue. But when I saw the film, I was like, this actually had me hooked from the start to the film to the end. I was kind of like enthralled. I was engaged into the story of this man. I mean, Joel Kinnaman. I mean, he was absolutely amazing. There was a lot of like, for example, moments in this kind of like, in this film where John Woo kind of like expresses emotion, because even like, for example, when you compare his amazing, masterpiece films from like Hong Kong, from the 80s and early 90s, you could kind of see that like there's always been like an emotional touch to his films, which kind of humanizes a lot of the characters who are kind of like thrown into these violent situations, and it kind of makes the audience sympathize with a lot with them. And Joel Kinnaman does this amazingly. I mean, his eyes are just like very expressive, very kind of like they're full of hurt, they're full of pain, and it kind of like you're just looking at this person's eyes. I mean, what it reminds me of is when I think it's in the making of Training Day when they were interviewing Denzel Washington, and he said this thing about Ethan Hawke. How he was praising Ethan Hawke as an actor, and he said that he has those eyes. He goes, he said of Ethan Hawke that Ethan Hawke has these eyes where you can look into these eyes. He kind of has seen something that he's able to kind of bring this kind of like shock and this kind of like kind of trauma that he kind of brings to the character, that he has actually kind of like he's living with something kind of more than what you see on the surface of this person. And Joel Kinnaman kind of captured that same kind of like those eyes, or as Al Pacino would say, it's the eyes, Chico, they never lie. But yeah, apart from that, I mean, yeah, even everybody else in this whole film, I mean, you had Kid Cudi, he was pretty good. Right now, at the top of my head, I couldn't really get the actress's name. If the actress is ever watching, I'm really sorry, but the one who plays his wife, I mean, the fact is, you could see it from their expression, the interactions. I mean, there was a lot of great chemistry, but the fact is that there was no dialogue to kind of express it. But the fact that they were able to do it physically, they were kind of like visually able to kind of like pick up on, like, for example, what these characters are feeling, the emotions, the trauma they're going through, and how they kind of, both of these characters are kind of grieving, the loss of their child, and it's something that probably every parent's worst nightmare. And and aside to that, being that it's a John Woo film, there's a lot of visual, visceral action, and the cinematography again is just like is phenomenal. The fact that even the action itself, it's full-blooded. It's very kind of like bloody, balletic, and it's just very kind of like emotional and kind of just high octane. It's pretty much like there was a lot of nods to like many John Woo films, not even just in terms of the actions. I mean, for example, there's like scenes where with Hard Boiled being kind of referenced to, where you got like these you got like action stuntmen on like motorcycles and whatnot, and moving vehicles, and high octane, like more or less just like really kind of like intense action sequences. And also like there was even kind of throwbacks to The Killer, like where you got these kind of like two men, like Kid Cudi, aka Scott Mescudi, playing like a police officer who's kind of like kind of also is involved in this whole situation, trying to kind of like curb the situation of these gangs, and how where him and kind of like Joel Kinnaman's character, the father, they kind of team up together. And even the there's a one long kind of like take where you see Joel Kinnaman, where the father's actually kind of like going up like a building's kind of staircase, and he's just shooting off like killing all these henchmen and stuff. And yeah, it's just great. I mean, even when I remember when Joel Kinnaman, not Joel Kinnaman, sorry, when Kid Cudi was actually asked, or Scott Mescudi was asked to be in this film, he said that as long as I get to do John Woo action. And John Woo asked, what is John Woo action? He goes, two guns blasting away. He goes, they'll want to be able to do that in your movie. And he does so, yep. And yeah, again, it's just the way that it's edited and the way that it's shot together. It's like you kind of have that feel of like the Hong Kong movies, and it's the action's loud, and it's like kind of blistering and fully kind of like it's just fully kind of like it's just kind of enthralling. It's a very enthralling film. I mean, definitely. I mean, one of the films that I would say this has kind of like. This is very much kind of left an impression on me. I'm thinking that, wow, John Woo, when it comes to visuals, he's able to tell a story without even kind of, without the need for dialogue. I mean, maybe if they had the dialogue on this movie, it could have kind of like maybe expressed or maybe kind of delved a bit more into the actual worlds. This is a very kind of minimal concept. considering this film only had a budget of like what, $28 million, which is peanuts in comparison to like what a lot of kind of other action movies made by the major studios have been. Like for example, like the John Wick movies, like the last John Wick film, and or even like for example the last Mission Impossible movie made by Tom Cruise. You know, they had a lot bigger of a budget. This was kind of like just pretty much filmed within a very short amount of time, limited budget, but at the end of the results, I mean, you were able to kind of get that kind of auteur trademark of John Woo. He was able to kind of like bring his flair, his style, the way that he was kind of like put back into like more or less maybe at the start of his career where he was making these small budget films and using his own resources. The fact is that he never had like any major backing or big budgets and whatnot. But then the fact is that maybe if they did kind of develop it into a bigger movie, maybe with like more dialogue, they probably would have gotten into the characters a bit more. But then, you know, got fleshed them out a bit more. And but the fact is that this is actually not really that long of a film. It is very kind of like engaging. I mean, visually, it's just a visual medium of like, you know, it's a piece of visual storytelling, and you know, it's pretty good. I mean, this is one of the kind of like the qualities. For example, Nicholas Winding Refn's Drive. There wasn't really that much dialogue in that movie, with the one with Ryan Gosling. I mean, I thought that was an absolute, you know, that movie is amazing. You know, it's definitely like, you know, it's an outstanding film. But this one, it's just kind of like it took that to another level where there was not much dialogue. But again, I mean, it's still itself. Again, my rating, okay, it's not a masterpiece, you know, by far. But then if you're just looking for a great story with like a lot of good action and even the performances, to be able to kind of appreciate the visual kind of like you know, qualities and attributes of acting, you know, without kind of like, you know, expressing your emotions without the use of dialogue or words. It's you know, it's pretty, you know, engaging, and it's pretty good. But again, this could have been probably a much better film than what it was, bearing in mind that it's a very minimalist film. Maybe not everyone's cup of tea, but for me, I mean, I would say like for like, you know, for an action movie, for a John Woo film, that, you know, it's better than a hell of a lot of the movies that have come out in the last few years, and in terms of action. But the fact is that this is like full-on R-rated kind of violent, bloody action, and you know, hopefully this maybe will lead to kind of like seeing more John Woo movies kind of like getting maybe released in the UK. Like maybe hopefully he'll kind of like make more maybe another Hollywood movie, but hopefully, you know, like this one, he probably gets more creative control over the film, unlike his previous ones. So I'm going to give this movie about 3.5 out of 5. You know, not perfect, not a masterpiece, you know, by far, but still an engaging, solid action, you know, thriller. This is also now what we're going to be doing is, of course, now we're going to be, you know, looking back at, for example, John Woo's Hollywood action movies today. So yeah, well, yeah, you know, what we're going to be doing is going to be going through, like, for example, like from 7 to 1. Yeah, so it's a countdown of like you know, ranking John Woo's Hollywood output. Now this does not include his Once a Thief, aka Violent Tradition, which was a TV pilot, and Blackjack, which also starred Dolph Lundgren, which both were directed by John Woo, but they weren't actual theatrical movies. They were both actual, you know, pilots. I mean, one of them did create a TV show, the other didn't. So we're not going to be including them. So yeah, so I'm just going to kind of like rattle off his Hollywood movies now. Number 7, right at the bottom of the pile was Paycheck from 2003, starring Ben Affleck and Uma Thurman. Again, this was John Woo's kind of like last Hollywood movie, where of course it's about a reverse engineer played by Ben Affleck, who is kind of wanted by the police and the authorities for a murder, but the fact that he's kind of like suffering from amnesia, and he's trying to kind of like piece together the puzzle and like find out what actually happened. Now, this was actually based off a Philip K. Dick short story, and I mean, there were some interesting action sequences in this. Now, I would put this at the bottom of the pile because you can kind of see there was some of John Woo's original flair and his style. But the fact is that it just seemed very watered down, and you know, I mean, there was also a problem with a lot of, like, for example, this was just kind of like where he was stripped of any kind of like creative control on the film. I mean, it was a moderate success, very moderate success, but it just wasn't really kind of like something that, you know, lit the world up, or you know, or even kind of held high to the standards of his more finer works, considering, you know, how great the auteur is. And again, this is where the film suffers. And like, yeah, I mean, Uma Thurman did okay in her role, but Ben Affleck, I mean, I just personally thought he was just a very bland kind of like action hero in this. It's like he's just kind of like just looked lost throughout the whole film, but he just didn't really kind of like have that motivation. Even kind of in the action sequences, he just didn't really seem to come across as like you know, as convincing enough for me. I mean, John Woo's known for making non-action actors look like actual bona fide action heroes. You know, that's just been one of his traits for many years. But you know, this was kind of you know, it just wasn't there. And you know, it's just one of those that you just kind of, it's a film that I would say you watch once, but you just don't want to kind of like revisit it and think that, oh, maybe it will kind of get better with time. I mean, I didn't watch this recently again just for the sake of this video, and I just still thought that it was just very unimpressive. You know, it's just, again, literally was just nothing but more than just a paycheck. Number 6 is Windtalkers. Yes, now this is a World War II epic about a soldier who's played by Nicolas Cage, who has to kind of like protect these Navajos, Native Americans, who are used as like kind of like who are using their own kind of language as code during the Second World War. And you know, and you kind of get to see how, you know, Nicolas Cage's character is kind of going through his own demons, trying to redeem himself as a person and all. Now, when John Woo had actually kind of proposed this idea for a movie, he wanted to make a film based on like the friendship of these two, of like, for example, Nicolas Cage's protagonist, and also the Native American soldiers. And of course, touching on the themes of like racism and bigotry, which was kind of like pretty much rife, like, you know, during the whole World War II era, even in America, of course. But the studio, 20th Century Fox at the time, decided to kind of stiff John Woo and say, listen, they just want, he said, like, you know, he said in his own words that they wanted something more like a John Wayne war movie where, come on, America's the good guy, and, you know, Germany and Japan or whatever, like, you know, the enemies are the bad guy. America, go USA. And you know, there were moments of like great action in this. There's a lot of kind of like blurred and like slow-mo kind of people shooting and whatnot, and explosions and all, but it just wasn't really kind of engaging. Now, there is a director's cut of this film, which is slightly a better improvement, but again, I mean, I personally say that considering this was made after he had just delivered like Paramount's biggest ever hit, you know, at that time, which is in 2000, he had actually did Mission Impossible 2, which was kind of like, you know, which was a huge box office success. It was the highest grossing film of 2000, and at that time it was the highest grossing film that Paramount Studios, and even the biggest movie that Tom Cruise had in his whole career prior to War of the Worlds. And I just don't know how 20th Century Fox kind of like was able to kind of trap John Woo into making a film where he was not even allowed in the editing room. And it kind of shows, you know, it shows that, you know, he had like kind of like wanted to make this really kind of like touching, profound war movie, which ended up being nothing but just a senseless, or, you know, sometimes sluggish, and you know, just overdrawn kind of like war movie where there isn't really much of kind of like much else to kind of like write home about. And yeah, I mean, this was a the first John Woo film in Hollywood to actually be a certified box office failure. It did not recover any of its budget, and even by the time where the DVD came out with the director's cut, it just wasn't enough to kind of like save the reputation of the film. Where even John Woo had actually kind of thought of like, maybe, you know what, I don't want to kind of think about this movie anymore. Even Nicolas Cage looked bored in this film for a lot of the time. It's he tried his best, but at the end of the day, it's just kind of like the film fell short, in my opinion. And even in comparison to like many of the great war movies that have been released, and also compared to like John Woo's filmography, this was pretty much a low point. It wasn't really that great of a movie, which is why it's not really looked back and kind of like in a profound way in any way at all. But like, I mean, I know the director's cut was kind of more of an improvement on the film, but again, it's just kind of like, every time I watch this movie, whenever I have seen it, it's just like, it just reminds me of how Hollywood studios had kind of like stiffed or screwed over an auteur from another country who's kind of like a legend when it comes to like action filmmaking. That's pretty much how it is. Number 5 is Broken Arrow, which stars John Travolta and Christian Slater from 1996. This was his second Hollywood movie, which came out in 1996 after he had made his debut in Hollywood 3 years ago with Hard Target. Now, yeah, this film itself, it's about like two kind of US Air Force pilots who, one of them, Deacon, played by John Travolta, is kind of like conspiring with other terrorists and kind of like ex-military personnel who have actually who steal a nuclear warhead. And Christian Slater, being his kind of like partner or his subordinate or someone who's like, or associate or friend, he's trying to stop him, and he teams up with a plucky forest ranger played by Samantha Mathis, and they try to stop them. Now, yeah, this film, I remember watching this as when it came out in the 90s. I used to like it. I mean, being like I was only like in my early teens or something, and I remember, oh yeah, it's John Travolta, Christian Slater. It's a John Woo movie. He made Hard Target, and I had already seen Hard Boiled, A Better Tomorrow, and The Killer by that point, and I thought, oh yeah, it's going to be a great movie, and I kind of enjoyed it at that time. And I thought, wow, it's so cool. There are some great moments of action in this film. For example, some of the kind of like action sequences on the train at the end, and a few kind of like exchanges throughout, and some interesting kind of like set pieces. But it was like very much a kind of a film for John Woo, where you could tell he again stiffed by Hollywood and restricted from making the kind of film that he wanted to make, where it was very much like a kind of, they were kind of really kind of like angling for a PG-13 rating for this film, and at the same time they were it was just for him to kind of say, yeah, I can make a studio friendly a movie that the studios can kind of like say, yeah, this is a safe movie. That there's nothing kind of like too outside the box. There's not going to be any MPAA kind of like ratings to kind of like people kind of like pulling back content, saying it's too violent, too bloody, or it's not going to make money at the box office. I mean, this was a moderate hit, but it was kind of like, it was enough for John Woo to kind of say, yeah, I can make movies that are kind of like studio friendly at the time. But for me, watching it back now, I feel that this film was just too talky for an action movie, considering it's a John Woo action movie. Now, I mean, John Travolta was great as the as the antagonist in this film. And Christian Slater did okay as well, but there was, again, great action movies, but it just felt like it was John Woo on like pretty much a leash. Like there were probably maybe about 10, 11 people, even though Terrence Chang was actually one of like the producers or executives on the film as well, but he just did not have much of a involvement. I mean, some of the slick action sequences and Hans Zimmer's music score just wasn't enough to kind of like, you know, or even the an underused Kurtwood Smith was just not enough to kind of like, watching it again. I watched this movie, well, maybe about a month or two ago on streaming. I think it was on Disney Plus or something. But it just wasn't really kind of like, it didn't kind of like. I watch it again. I'm like, it just isn't really that great. It's just like it's just an exercise for him to say that, hey, look at me, Hollywood. I can make a movie within your boundaries and your guidelines that you set me. Number 4 is Mission Impossible 2, starring Tom Cruise, Thandie Newton, Dougray Scott, and Anthony Hopkins. Again, this is like the second installment in Tom Cruise's installment of like a spy franchise based on the hit TV show from the 60s. This time around, Ethan Hunt is kind of like on pretty much on a mission to find a kind of like a global kind of like terrorist who's kind of run off with a deadly virus which can kind of create a pandemic in the world, killing millions and billions of innocent lives. And he teams up with undercover agent played by the absolutely stunning and charismatic Thandie Newton, who's gone undercover to get close to the Scottish villain played by Dougray Scott. Now, this was like a very passable film. Now, this is pretty much just after The Matrix had come out, so a lot of the action and even like the martial arts choreography and the fight scenes were pretty much there was a lot of kind of like Matrix type of flair to them. And even like, for example, the action sequence, there was only like 2 shootouts, and they were more or less towards the end. Although it is considered a lot more darker than the rest of the Mission Impossible franchise, this was probably the most lacking one, and considerably, it's actually one of like, it is John Woo's biggest, highest grossing film in the world as the moment, and this was actually the highest grossing film in in the year 2000, beating like the likes of Gladiator, which was by far, I would say, probably the best movie of that year. And it's just, again, it was pretty much like the action is not as bloody as you would normally expect to kind of see in like a John Woo film. This was very kind of like slick, and like you can tell there's a lot of a big kind of like studio kind of involvement in it. But this pretty much showed that John Woo was pretty much on the top of the world at that time, making like he was like someone who'd actually been known for just making like Hong Kong action movies, and who's now making like big budget kind of action movies which are breaking box office records. And I was surprised that even after that film, the fact that like he should have been given full creative control on his next movie, even by Hollywood standards, considering the fact that it's John Woo, he's just made he wants to make a war movie, fair enough, let him make it, because he's done a good enough job with Mission Impossible 2. And that was a huge hit for Paramount. And I'm surprised Paramount didn't really kind of like offer him a bigger deal, saying that you can make whichever movie you want. We'll just kind of like let you make it. But again, it was passable. It's an enjoyable mainstream kind of like John Woo light. It was John Woo light. That's what it was. But it was okay. It's an average movie. Number 3 is the movie we just talked about, that I just reviewed, which is Silent Night from 2023. Now, even though that the film's action is pretty much, a lot of it, the huge bulk of it is towards like the final act of the film, But even building up to that, there are small bursts of action and violence, but there's a lot of emotional content. And John Woo again kind of decided to come back to Hollywood to make this film. It was produced by the people who made the John Wick movies, which kind of like, you know, they kind of understood John Woo's action style. And again, this was like pretty much, this was kind of like him kind of like showing that, yeah, I've still got it. It may not be, you know, the top tier kind of level work that we're used to, but this is actually pretty, you know, this is probably, you know, this is what I can bring to the table. And, you know, great performances, you know, great kind of visuals, and a lot of nods to a lot of John Woo's previous works. And, you know, some is kind of like part fan service and part kind of like great kind of visual exercise. Number 2 is Hard Target from 1993, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, Yancy Butler, Lance Henriksen, and Arnold Vosloo. Again, one of my, you know, top 50 favorite action movies of all time, as I had mentioned it in one of my previous videos, and also probably Jean-Claude Van Damme's best movie that he has actually made, you know, apart from Bloodsport, which is like his best non-martial arts movie. Now, I mean, this again, I mean, we know the story. A young woman's looking for her father, who is a former veteran, that you know, eventually which leads to a you know, a game where homeless people are kind of given a chance to win money, where rich people are hunting them for sport, and they have to actually get to a certain kind of get to the end of this race, where they have to kind of dodge all these bullets and people trying to kill them in order to kind of like have that money. But then Jean-Claude Van Damme's you know, out of work sailor is you know, in New Orleans, is kind of like, you know, he decides to kind of help Yancy Butler in uncovering these and stopping these people and getting justice for her father. Yeah, this was pretty much a great kind of action movie where, you know, the action, again, it was slick. The cinematography was great. There was a lot of kind of like high octane. There's a lot of ballistic kind of like shootouts throughout the film. You know, some great kind of like car stunts, and you even get to kind of see Jean-Claude Van Damme's like 360 kicks and like slow-mo and whatnot. And, you know, of course, the most coolest mullet in movie history. I mean, you know, Jean-Claude Van Damme, come on, blue jeans, mullet, and a black overcoat. You know, that was pretty cool, especially his kind of like his you know, his first like fight sequence in the movie, where the way that kind of like he squares up to the bad guys who are trying to kind of like rob Yancy Butler, and he kind of like just moves his duster, his overcoat to the side, and he just kind of like just brings his leg forward, like, yeah, that's almost like someone drawing their weapon, which kind of like was a neat touch. And yeah, again, I mean, John Woo had actually kind of like just made this movie, even though he found it really stressful. I mean, Sam Raimi, I mean, apparently was trying to kind of like let John Woo make the film the way that he wanted to make it. There was eventually a director's cut of this movie, which at one point was only on VHS. Yeah, but then, you know, very kind of like just a work print version, but then apparently Kino Lorber had actually released it on 4K. Number 1 now, yeah, of course, surprise, surprise, it's Face Off from 1997. John Travolta, Nicolas Cage, Gina Gershon, Joan Allen, and several others. Of course, an international terrorist, Castor Troy, is kind of like wounded and kind of like hospitalized by Sean Archer, who's an FBI agent, and in order to find out where Castor Troy's next bomb is, he has to kind of like literally get his you know, face removed and assume his identity to actually find out. But then when Castor Troy wakes up, he takes John Travolta's, Sean Archer's face, and starts impersonating him, kills everyone who knows about the mission, and it becomes a cat and mouse game between the two. Yeah, again, this is John Woo's best action movie in the West. I mean, this was like pretty much this had like the hallmarks of all John Woo movies. You had like conflicting characters, which kind of like some sort of similarities, but ballistic action again, really kind of like well captured. A lot of violence, great cinematography. Even the hammy action acting of like John Travolta was great to see him again as a bad guy. Even Nicolas Cage fared pretty well, playing somewhat of Castor Troy at the start, and then at the end he's like towards the like more or less the halfway mark he's playing Sean Archer. I mean, he did pretty well, and the way that the film was, visually it was dark, violent, bloody, and just full of great action from the start to the finish. This was pretty much when John Woo had full creative control over a movie. After showing that he can, stay within the confinements of studio requirements with a film like Broken Arrow, but then, being selective for his next following movies, he decided to, he wanted to only work on a movie that he would have creative control over, and which paid off. I mean, the film was a box office success. And also, for example, it had like, it was critically acclaimed at the time, and it did, it was kind of like, it is memorable, still is John Woo's best Hollywood action movie. So, yeah, I mean, that was my kind of like ranking of John Woo's, Western output, Western theatrical output, because we're not counting his two like made-for-TV pilot movies. But yeah, this is it. That was my kind of like, now, those of you celebrating Christmas, hope you have a great time, and, spend it with your families, stay safe, don't do anything irresponsible, and just keep watching movies. And let me know, how would you rate John Woo's Hollywood movies, and what did you think of Silent Night? Let me know in the comments section, and yeah, I'll see you on the next one. Might even be closer than it is.